In the winter of 1981, downtown Denver looked like it had learned to keep secrets. Snow didn't fall so much as it settled quietly, politely on the shoulders of parked cars and the dark mouths of alleyways behind the hotels, the kind of cold that made everything feel muffled, as if the city itself were listening through cotton. Maria Rios started her shift at 6:12 a.m. at the Front Range Plaza Hotel, a mid-tier place with brass doors, carpet that always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and a steady rotation of businessmen who never remembered your name but always remembered their coffee. She was 32, a single mother, and she carried her life in routines, the way other people carried purses, keys, schedules, quiet competence. She pushed her linen cart out of the service elevator and into the 7th-floor corridor, wheels squeaking once before she corrected the angle with her hip. The hallway lights were still on, their night setting, dim, warm, forgiving. Doors slept behind brass numbers. Somewhere a television murmured in Spanish, somewhere else a shower turned on and stayed on, too long, like someone letting water run to drown out thoughts. Room 714 had been "Do Not Disturb" for 4 days. That wasn't unusual by itself. What was unusual was everything around it. The first day, Maria had noticed the tray outside the door, 2 cheeseburgers, untouched, cold as stone. The second day, the tray was gone, and a fresh one appeared by noon. The third day, there was no tray at all, but the ice bucket that should have stayed in the room turned up in the hallway trash, wiped clean inside like it had been rinsed and dried on purpose. The fourth day, when Maria checked her cart inventory at the supply closet, she realized she'd gone through twice the usual number of bath towels on that end of the hall, despite not having entered 714 even once. Someone in that room was living hard and invisible, working the hotel like a machine. Maria paused by the wall mirror near the elevator and glanced down the corridor. The "Do Not Disturb" tag hung perfectly centered on 714's handle, not crooked like most, not torn, not smudged by fingers. It looked placed with intention, like a sign in a museum. The door itself was closed. The latch was caught in a way that left a hair-thin seam along the frame, enough for the door to give the illusion of being fully shut while still allowing it to open silently with the slightest pull. Maria didn't think, "Spy." She thought, "That's wrong." She rolled the cart closer, trying to make it look like she was simply checking the vacuum cords coiled by the baseboard. As she neared 714, she heard it again. The sound she'd tried to tell herself was a faulty pipe or a loose vent. A soft click, then another. Not random, not mechanical chatter. A measured rhythm, like someone tapping a pencil, but steadier, patient, purposeful. Maria felt the small hairs on her arms lift under her uniform sleeves. She leaned slightly, as if listening for footsteps inside, for the shuffle of a tired businessman, for a cough, any human marker that would make the clicks make sense. Nothing. Just the click-pause, click-click-pause. She pulled her cart back a fraction, breathing through her nose, keeping her face neutral the way she did when guests yelled about late towels. In the reflective glass of the framed landscape opposite 714, she saw the end of the corridor behind her. Empty. Still. Then she noticed something else. On the carpet outside 714, barely visible against the patterned weave, were faint streaks, thin lines, as if something heavy and narrow had been dragged out and back in again. Something with edges. Maria stared at those lines for 1 extra second too long, and in that second, like the room had noticed she was listening. Maria didn't move at first. She stood there with both hands resting on the cart handle, shoulders loose, face blank, the same posture she used when guests opened their doors half-dressed and wanted the hallway to pretend it hadn't seen anything. Her mind tried to supply a harmless explanation. A broken thermostat, a timer, a cheap travel alarm. But the silence felt deliberate now. Held too tightly. Like someone had pinched a wire and was waiting to see if the current would spark. She rolled the cart forward again. Slow, squeak-free, until she was directly across from 714. In the landscape print's dark glass, her own eyes looked sharper than she felt. She reached for the door of 712 instead, knocked lightly, announced, "Housekeeping," and waited, performing the routine out loud, so anyone listening would hear exactly what they were supposed to hear. No answer. She pulled her master key from the lanyard at her hip, but instead of opening 712, she let the key hang and drifted a step closer to 714, as if checking the baseboard for scuffs. The seam in the door frame was still there. The latch still half caught. Maria's pulse slowed the way it did right before an accident. When your body stops wasting energy on panic and starts counting distances. A smell reached her then. Faint, but wrong for a hotel room. Warm electronics. Not cigarette smoke. Not cologne. That dusty, heated scent of a television left on too long, or a radio running under a blanket. She had smelled it once at her uncle's place when he tried to fix a shortwave set in the garage. She didn't touch the door. She didn't want fingerprints anywhere near it. Instead, she lowered herself slowly, as if tying her shoe, and looked at the bottom edge of the frame. That was where she saw it. A hair-thin filament, almost invisible, ran from beneath the door to the hinge-side trim, disappearing into the shadow where the carpet met the wall. It wasn't a phone cord. It wasn't a vacuum line. It was too fine, too intentional, like someone had laid it with tweezers and patience. Maria's throat tightened. She straightened, keeping her expression neutral, and began pushing her cart away from 714 like nothing had happened. 2 doors down, she stopped at the housekeeping alcove where the ice machine hummed behind a metal panel. She pretended to check her supply list, but her eyes kept returning to the same details. The perfect "Do Not Disturb" tag, the 2 clean ice bucket in the hallway trash, the drag marks in the carpet, the smell of hot circuitry. She tried to breathe it off. Then the elevator chimed. The doors opened, and a man stepped out who didn't match the floor. Not a guest, not staff, no luggage, no coffee, no newspaper. He walked with the calm, practiced pace of someone who already knew where he was going. He didn't glance at the room numbers as he moved. He walked straight towards 714. Maria lowered her eyes and pretended to reorganize folded sheets. In her peripheral vision, she watched him stop at the door, not knock, not use a keycard. He simply leaned close, too close, like he was listening to the wood. One hand slipped into his coat pocket. He brushed it along the seam of the door frame where Maria had seen the filament. The movement was so casual, it could have been a habit. A nervous tick. The clicking started again inside the room. Sharper now, faster responding. The man didn't smile, but his posture eased by a fraction, like a lock had just turned. Maria's stomach dropped. The room wasn't just occupied, it was being operated. The man stayed there only a few seconds. Then he walked away from 714, back toward the elevator, passing Maria without looking at her face. But as he crossed in front of her cart, his gaze flicked down quick, surgical, taking in her name tag. Maria. The elevator doors closed behind him. The clicking in 714 slowed again, then stopped. And Maria understood the most frightening part. She wasn't just observing something wrong. She'd been noticed. Maria didn't go back to 714. She kept moving because stopping would make her a question. And questions were exactly what that hallway didn't tolerate. She pushed the cart toward the service stairwell at the far end of the floor. The one guests never used, the one that smelled like bleach and old carpet glue. Every few steps, she forced her shoulders to stay loose, her face bored, her pace unchanged like she'd learned long ago, working hotels in a city that taught women to survive by looking uninteresting. At the stairwell door, she fumbled with the knob on purpose, as if her hands were clumsy. She wanted anyone watching to conclude, harmless, just a housekeeper. No threat, no pattern. Inside the stairwell, the air was colder. The fluorescent lights buzzed at a high frequency that made her teeth ache. She leaned her forehead against the painted cinder block and listened. Nothing. No footsteps behind her. No door opening. No rush of movement that would confirm she was already being handled. Her first instinct was to call the front desk. Her second instinct, stronger, was not to put anything about this into the hotel's normal bloodstream. Phones could be listened to. Switchboards could be tapped. Even if she was wrong, the wrong people would learn what she'd seen. She thought of her father, who'd come to this country with 2 suitcases and a rule. Never make yourself dependent on one line of safety. Always have a second. Maria went down one flight, then another, to the service level, where the vending machines lived and the housekeeping office sat behind a door labeled "Linens Authorized Only." Inside, it was warmer, cluttered, familiar. Stacks of towels, a radio playing low, a calendar with someone's birthday circled in red. Rita was there, folding pillowcases like she'd folded 1,000,000 before. Older, tougher, the kind of woman who had seen management change, owners change, guests change, but the same secrets always stay. Rita looked up once and instantly knew something was wrong. Not because Maria looked frightened, but because she didn't look anything at all. "What happened?" Rita asked. Maria didn't answer with the story. She answered with the safest piece of it. "Do we have a note about 714? Any maintenance? Any long stay?" Rita's brow furrowed. "No. That room's flagged." "What kind of flagged?" Rita lowered her voice. "They told us, don't enter, don't call, don't knock. If the tag's up, we leave it. Even if it's 3 days. Maria felt her stomach tighten. "Who told you?" Rita hesitated, then made a small, helpless motion with her hands like, "You know who, Mr. Keene. House manager." He said, "It came from upstairs. Corporate." Maria forced herself to nod, like that meant something normal. "Who pays?" Rita blinked. "What?" "The room. Who pays for it?" Rita glanced toward the hallway, as if the walls might report her. "Sometimes a man comes. Not the same one every time. He signs the ledger with a different name. Cash. Always cash. And the handwriting." She grimaced, searching for the right word. "Too neat. Like he practiced being messy." Maria's throat went dry. She pictured the beige overcoat again. The way the man hadn't looked for the room number because he already knew it. She pictured the filament under the door, the clicking that answered his touch. Rita, reading Maria's face, leaned closer. "You saw something." Maria nodded once. Rita didn't ask her to explain. She reached under the desk and pulled out the maintenance logbook, flipping pages with quick, experienced fingers. "Okay," she murmured. "We do this right." Maria stared. "Do what right?" Rita tapped a page. "There's a number here. Old number. For a federal safety inspector. He came through once after a situation. Mr. Keene hated him. Said he asked questions the hotel wasn't allowed to answer." Maria's heart thumped hard enough to make her dizzy. "Is he real?" Rita's eyes were flat and certain. Real enough that management went pale when he walked in. Maria looked at the phone on the desk. Rita slid the logbook toward her, then pushed the phone away. Not from here, she said. You call from outside, payphone, or a diner. You tell him one thing, only something he can't ignore. Maria swallowed. Like what? Rita's voice dropped into a whisper that sounded like prayer. Tell him there's a room that never sleeps. And it answers when someone touches the doorframe. Maria left through the service exit with her coat half buttoned and her uniform hidden under a thrift store cardigan. The kind of disguise that didn't look like a disguise at all. Outside, the city air cut sharp across her cheeks. Snow along the curb had turned grey. She walked 2 blocks without looking back. Not fast enough to be fear, not slow enough to be careless, and she kept her hands empty. No bag, no purse, nothing to grab if someone decided she needed to be steered. The payphones were in the diner on the corner, a place where cops drank coffee and truckers ate eggs, and everyone pretended they weren't listening. Maria slid into a booth near the window, ordered a coffee she didn't want, and waited until a waitress turned away before she stood and crossed to the phones, with a handful of change that suddenly felt too loud. Rita's Federal Safety Inspector number sat in Maria's memory like a splinter. She didn't write it down. She didn't dare. She fed the coins in and dialed. It rang twice. A man picked up without greeting. Not hello, not office, just breath, controlled and quiet. Maria spoke first, because silence would invite questions she couldn't afford. My name is Maria Alvarez, she said, keeping her voice plain. A pause. Not surprise, assessment. Who gave you this number? The man asked. A co-worker, Maria said. I'm not calling to complain. I'm calling because there's a room that's been do not disturb for days, and it isn't empty. And it answers. It's come down. Answers how? Maria stared at the tiled wall above the phone, forcing herself to stay precise. There's a click behind the door frame. Like a relay. Like something engages when someone touches the molding. And the carpet under the door, there's a line. A wire-thin line. Like filament. On the other end, the man's breathing changed. Just slightly, but enough to tell her she'd finally said the one thing that mattered. What room number? He asked. Maria hesitated. She hated giving him anything that could be written down, traced, weaponized. But she'd already stepped into it. 714. Another pause. Maria looked through the diner window. A city bus wheezed past. A couple argued softly on the sidewalk. 2 men in heavy coats stood by a newspaper box, smoking. One of them glanced toward the diner, then away, like he'd done it 1,000 times without thinking. I don't know, Maria said honestly. Listen carefully, the man replied. His voice wasn't dramatic. It was procedural, like he'd rehearsed calm for a living. You're going to hang up, and you're going to leave the diner through the front. You're going to walk to the bus stop on 10th, not the one outside that window. If anyone follows you, do not run. Go into the grocery on the corner and ask for the manager by name. His name is Frank Dombrowski. Maria's stomach clenched. How do you know? Because I'm not guessing. He cut in, and there was steel under the quiet now. Do you understand me, Maria? She did. And that was the worst part. Understanding meant admitting. This wasn't paranoia. This was a system. Yes. One more thing, the man said. No. Good. A beat. If you see the house manager keen, do not let him know you called. If he asks, you saw nothing. You are tired. You made a mistake. Maria swallowed. Who are you? The man finally gave her a name. But he gave it like a door, barely opening. Agent Carver, he said. The line went dead. Maria stood there with the receiver still in her hand. The dial tone a flat, uncaring sound, and she realized something that made her knees threaten to soften. The scariest traps didn't snap shut with a bang. They closed quietly like a hotel door sealing behind you while you were still trying to decide whether you'd imagined the click. Maria didn't take the bus stop outside the diner window. She walked out as if she'd simply remembered something she forgot at home. Shoulders loose, coffee untouched on the table behind her, like proof she wasn't running. The winter air hit her lungs and made her eyes water, which helped tears could pass for cold. She kept moving. 2 blocks, then 3. The bus stop on 10th looked the same as every other. A metal bench, a posted schedule that lied about arrival times, a slushy gutter. She stood with her back to the streetlight so she could watch reflections in the dark glass of a storefront without turning her head. In the window, she saw a man pause near the curb as if reading the timetable, though his eyes didn't track the paper. He looked past it, scanning faces. Maria's pulse climbed. But she didn't bolt. Carver had been specific for a reason. Running would turn a watch into a chase, and a chase was the kind of story that ended with her name erased and filed away as an accident. A city bus sighed to the curb. Doors opened. People climbed on. Maria stayed put. The man near the curb didn't board either. He shifted his weight, lit a cigarette with hands that didn't shake, and exhaled in a way that made the smoke drift between them like a curtain. Maria's throat went dry. She crossed the street, not hurried, just decisively, like someone who'd realized she'd been waiting on the wrong side. At the corner, the grocery store's bell jingled when she pushed through, and warmth wrapped around her with the smell of oranges and wet wool. The fluorescent lights were harsh, unforgiving. It felt safer anyway. Harsh meant visible. She walked straight to the service counter and leaned toward the teenage cashier, as if asking about canned soup. "Is Frank Dombrowski here?" The kid blinked, confused, then glanced over his shoulder. Yeah. Frank." A man appeared from behind a swinging door, mid-40s, thick mustache, apron dusted with flour like he'd been stocking bread. His eyes found Maria and stayed on her face with the careful stillness of someone measuring danger in inches. "You Maria?" he asked. She nodded, barely. Frank didn't ask why. He only looked past her to the front windows, then to the aisles, then back again. "Come with me," he said, and lifted the counter flap. He guided her behind the shelves into a narrow corridor that smelled like cardboard and bleach. A phone hung on the wall. Frank picked it up and dialed, without looking at the numbers. Like muscle memory. Like he'd done it before, in other winters. Maria stood there, listening. No ring, no greeting. Just Frank, speaking into the receiver with clipped certainty. "She's here," he said. "Yes, same as you thought." 10th and Grove had eyes. He listened, nodded once. Then he covered the mouthpiece and looked at Maria. "Don't go back to your apartment tonight," he said. "And don't go back to that hotel unless they tell you to." Maria's stomach turned. "Who is they?" she whispered. Frank uncovered the receiver and spoke again. Softer. "She doesn't know anything," he said. Maria heard a sound from the front of the store glass, rattling as the door opened hard, the bell ringing too sharp, too impatient. Frank's gaze went to the corridor entrance. He didn't flinch. He just put the phone down and reached into his apron pocket like a man grabbing a pen. Instead, he pulled out a small brass key. "Back door," he said to Maria. "Wajaven the worth." And for the first time, Maria understood what Carver meant about invisible wires. Once you tripped one, the world didn't explode. It simply reorganized itself around you quietly, efficiently, so that every normal doorway became a decision that could get you killed. The back door dumped Maria into an alley glazed with old snow and spilled salt. The kind of narrow space where sound traveled too far and shadows belonged to whoever arrived first. Frank didn't follow her out. He didn't need to. The key in her palm felt heavier than metal permission. And a warning, so she moved the way he'd instructed. No sprint, no looking over her shoulder, no drama that would turn heads at the wrong time. Halfway down the alley, she noticed the first thing that didn't belong. A fresh strip of masking tape on a drain pipe at shoulder height, folded into a tiny flag. Not bright, not obvious, just enough to be seen by someone who knew to look for it. It wasn't there yesterday, Maria was sure, because she'd taken this shortcut after her shift, cursing the ice and the smell of trash behind the hotel. She stepped past it anyway, pretending she hadn't seen anything. At the mouth of the alley, the street opened into a wash of headlights and slush. A delivery van rolled by too slowly, engine idling in a patient way that had nothing to do with deliveries. Maria's fingers tightened around the brass key. She kept walking toward light, toward people, toward noise, because silence was where hands could reach you without witnesses. A public phone booth sat outside a laundromat, grimy glass, dangling receiver. But the booth's coin return was taped shut, with the same masking tape, same fold, same little flag. Her skin prickled. Inside the laundromat, dryers thundered like distant artillery. A woman fed quarters into a machine and never once looked up. Maria crossed to the change machine, hands shaking just enough to pass as cold, and watched the booth through the window as if waiting for someone. A man appeared across the street, mid-30s. Wool coat, no hat, despite the wind. He didn't stare at the booth. He stared at the laundromat's reflection in a parked car window, which meant he was staring at her without facing her. Maria swallowed hard and did the only thing she could do without becoming the story, and dialed the first number that came to mind. Her sister in Ohio, then hung up before it rang. Not a call, a tap on the line. As she turned away, the van that wasn't a delivery van eased forward, aligning with the booth like it was taking a measurement. And behind the laundromat's fogged glass, Maria saw Frank's brass key reflected in her hand, proof that whatever this was, it had already decided she was part of it. The hotel lobby hit her like a different climate. Warm air, carpet hush, holiday music piped in too softly to be real. Maria walked in with her head down, as if she belonged to the furniture. And that was the trick. In places like this, the invisible people were the ones who lasted. She didn't go to the desk. She didn't go to the elevators. She went straight to the public restroom corridor near the ballroom. Bright lights, constant foot traffic, no corners that stayed dark for long. She washed her hands she didn't need to wash and watched the mirror, not for faces. Two men entered the lobby within 30 seconds of each other and never looked at each other once. One wore a long coat and carried a briefcase that looked too empty to be worth carrying. The other, thicker build, knit cap pulled low, paused at the brochure stand, flipped through pamphlets without reading, then drifted toward the payphones as if he'd just remembered an urgent call. Maria's pulse thudded in her ears. She moved, not away, through cutting across the lobby at a normal pace, letting the Christmas tree and the families with shopping bags break sightlines. Frank's brass key was still in her pocket. It felt like a beacon. The man with the knit cap lifted a receiver. He didn't dial. He waited, listening for a sound that wasn't meant for ordinary ears. Then he hung up and walked out. A minute later, the briefcase man rose from a chair he'd never been sitting in when Maria first came in. He crossed toward the payphones and stopped one step short, as if he'd noticed something, as if the air had changed. Maria realized, with a cold clarity, what her tap had done. It hadn't asked for help. It had told someone she was alive and moving a dot in a system that could now be tracked. The briefcase man turned his head just slightly, eyes catching hers in the mirror's edge, not openly, Not long, just enough to let her know he'd found her without ever looking like he had. Maria didn't run. She walked straight to the front desk, leaned in, and said the first honest sentence she'd said all night. "I need security. Now. Someone is following me." She cussed. And because the lobby was full of witnesses, because she'd chosen light over silence, the man with the briefcase didn't reach for her. He smiled, small, polite, then turned and walked out as if he'd simply changed his mind about making a call. By morning, room 714 would be empty in a way that felt surgical. No luggage, no papers, no trash, just a perfectly made bed and a "Do Not Disturb" sign lying face down on the carpet like a mask someone had finally decided to drop.